We all want a bad guy. It's just easier if we know who the Darth Vader is. I think that the bottled water industry is a space where that can become very easy for people to do. It's dangerous to do that when, in fact, if you look more closely, you realize, well, not everybody, for example, has the option. If you live in a country where you don't have good municipal water supplies, you might not have a choice. So you can't necessarily vilify something that may not be a real option for people to avoid in some spaces. Over 70% of our bodies are made up of water. We can go weeks without food, but only a couple of days without water. And yet 2 billion people on this planet, roughly 1 in 4 of us, doesn't have reliable access to clean drinking water. At the same time, we're producing around 220 million tons of plastic waste per year, about 8 million of which are in single-use plastic bottles alone. I'm Elena Berg, and I'm going to talk to you today about why I think bottled water is such a compelling case study for understanding just how complex sustainability is. So I have a kind of a long career and a broad training in anthropology, animal behavior, evolutionary biology, and environmental science. I did both my undergraduate and my master's degrees in anthropology, where I studied primate social behavior, forensics, and human evolution. I then switched gears, and looked at social behavior of birds for my PhD, so a number of different bird species, and then spent 10 more years doing a variety of postdocs in many different disciplines, looking at questions from a lot of different disciplinary perspectives, but also working with a lot of different communities all over the world. And then in 2014, I was hired at AUP as an environmental scientist, where I've been it's been my home base ever since. For the first 20 years of my career, I spent most of my time in the field, working in deserts, tropical forests, in Madagascar, Israel, Costa Rica, Mexico, Australia. Is there another one? Barbados. Where I learned, I think the important point to make is that I learned that different communities, different cultures approach questions in really different ways. They're contending with very different kinds of problems. And it gave me a deep appreciation for how important it is to have an interdisciplinary perspective and to try to work with different people to solve problems. You'll see at the bottom here that I've also worked with seed beetles. I actually, since 2010, have been working kind of full-time in the laboratory, no longer in the field, looking at questions of how this model system, how these animals adapt to climate change. So again, a variety of interests, but the important point to make is that I have come to really appreciate interdisciplinarity. So this brings us, logically to water. When I was hired at AUP, I began looking for ways to work with my environmental science students on kind of hot topic concerns in the environment. And freshwater resources really came to the top as something that everybody was worried about for good reason. And as part of that effort, I began this talk by talking about how crucial this resource is for us, how many people don't have good access to it, and all of the human rights issues around that. With climate change, we're also looking at increasing degradation of freshwater sources. So again, there's so many ways that we can look at this question. And so as part of this, I began doing water tastings with my students just to get them thinking about what they were drinking and the difference between tap water and various bottled waters that they might be carrying around. And at the same time, I was interacting with one of my colleagues who is an economist, who happens to study the economics of water. So here I am, doing water tastings with my students, and suddenly I have a colleague who actually studies this in his research. And so we decided to work together to do water tastings on a more formal scale with our students. And we started doing this, and as part of that, I realized that there's such a thing as a water sommelier, which blew my mind away. No idea. Most of you will have no idea that these people exist. And these are people who've trained in the field, who understand that there are different sources of water, and who have trained themselves to be able to detect and understand the different influences of different minerals on taste profiles. It's a really kind of wonderful world that I had no idea it existed. And so I thought, here I am, I'm a skeptic. I'm a bottled water skeptic for really good reasons, right? Like bottled water is the poster child for environmental wastefulness. So I'm like, well, I have to understand this industry from the inside. I have to understand it from this perspective. And so I started training to become a water sommelier myself, which was a several-year arduous process. And much to my kind of amazement, I realized, like many of these things, that the issues are more complex once you start peeling the layers of the onion. And I, began to go to water competitions. I became a judge at international water competitions. I started writing papers with my economics colleague. We published a couple of papers in the Journal of Wine Economics, not only on kind of what people can taste, that became a driving interest of ours, but also, what are these competitions about when we look at water tasting or wine tasting? Are the judges really detecting differences, or is this all kind of nonsense? So we were really curious about that. And it's become a part of my life that is very, very fun and exciting and a little strange. I learned that water comes from many different sources. So that was something I hadn't really appreciated sufficiently. Water comes from surface water, rainwater, lots of different kinds of springs, icebergs, glacial runoff. You can even harvest water from mist or clouds. So water comes from different places, and water that has percolated through different kinds of soil types and rock types has taken on very different kinds of properties. There's waters that have a lot of minerals and other waters that have very few. Some are naturally carbonated, others are not. So water comes from different places, and those different sources provide different kinds of properties to those waters. So that's one of the first things I learned, that water is not just water, right? That not all water is the same. But I also learned that not all bottled water is the same. So there's a big difference between the big multinational conglomerates that have profit and high volume as their kind of main goal, right? That they want to get as much water as possible into bottles to sell to as many people all over the planet. Their priority is volume and profit. They are often mixing sources from different places. And also the bottom line there is a focus on hydration rather than on kind of enjoying what you're tasting. And sometimes that can pit bottled water against tap water in ways that I think are really dangerous. But what I realized in my work is that there are also these small businesses that are typically focused on one single source. They're bottling water from a particular source that has particular properties. These are small companies whose livelihoods depend on protecting those sources. So they have a vested interest in protecting the watershed. And these businesses, I think, are uniquely positioned to be advocates and to help people understand that not all water is the same. And so I started taking this kind of information and my ideas and working through these ideas into the sort of science communication realm outside of academia, did public lectures on this, and have produced a couple of podcasts, one with our very own Clark Marchese, on the mineral water industry and all of these kind of nuances. And I've also brought these questions to the classroom. So I think, again, this is a really ideal topic to bring to students, so that they can also start grappling with the complexities and all of the layers that even something like bottled water that's easy to hate, if you look more closely, you can see that, again, not all water is the same and that not all bottled water is the same. and that none of these environmental questions that we're asking are as simple as they seem. So we have to be willing to lean into that complexity and to embrace that complexity. And it's a really wonderful place, place like AUP, this liberal arts institution that looks at many, many disciplines, is a really wonderful place to do that kind of work, because students are appreciating with all of the classes they're taking in different disciplines that it's important to look at things from different perspectives. So again, this brings it back to my early career, doing all that work in many different deserts and forests with many different communities, that we cannot solve problems unless we are thinking about things from many different perspectives, and we cannot solve these problems unless we are inviting as many people as possible to the table. And it's useful, I think, for students and then for anybody to think of a specific example or space. And so I like digging deeply into this particular case study because I think it offers an opportunity to understand the complexity of sustainability on lots of levels.
Elena, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Clark.
So you and I have known each other for quite a long time, and we've had many conversations about the environment. There is something that you have mentioned more than once, which is that you sometimes wrestle with the concept or even the word sustainability. So I'm wondering if you can maybe just chat to us about that and talk us through some of the ways you go about thinking about this complex idea.
Yeah, it's definitely been something we've discussed in so many ways, so many contexts. I do think that word gets overused, and it can be sometimes just this notion of a simple fix, that if we just do this, this, and this, we'll be living sustainably with the environment. So let's start with the positive. So I think that the positive of striving for sustainability is that I think it's really important for people to have goals. I think it's important for them to start to imagine ways that they can have a positive impact. And so if you are thinking in a framework of sustainability and it is motivating you to eat less meat, fly less, there are these wonderful carbon footprint calculators that are not perfect, but that are available online, where you can input kind of all of the different ways that you're leading your life, and it can give you feedback on maybe things that would surprise you about how impactful certain things are that you're doing. So maybe you can fly a little less, maybe you can eat a different kind of food, and these calculators can help you see just the relative impact of all that stuff. That's the positive. We need to be motivated, coordinated, and have a goal and have hope. The negative, again, is this notion that it can be that we can fall back on easy fixes, and it can be this way to check a box and feel like we're done. And institutions can also fall into this trap, and then you end up with greenwashing, where an institution is like, great, I'm done. I did this thing. We have a sustainability officer. We have this thing on our website. We're done. We're sustainable. So I worry about that notion of an easy fix, and I think we need to be more appreciative of how complex these solutions need to be.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those terms where you have to hold multiple truths at one time. Of course, we don't want to either check the box and think our work is done, or even on the flip side of that, say it's too hard, we are too stressed and can't even take the action in the first place. And on the flip side, with it being an aspirational concept, one thing I hope that comes through this conversation and others is that we have a moment to reflect on our own agency. But it is certainly a complex topic, and maybe as humans we like to categorize things and say, with drinking water, this is, bottled water is good, this is bad. So bringing it back to your work on water, can you explain how some of these narratives, are maybe falsely imposed, these good, bad narratives in such a complex topic of water resources?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my introduction, it's really easy to vilify bottled water, right? It's just an easy thing that we can try not to do. We can try not to buy it. But I would say that's one of the simplest good bad dichotomies. We all want a bad guy. It's just easier if we know who the Darth Vader is, who we need to kind of be against and avoid. And I think that the bottled water industry is a space where that can become very easy for people to do. I think that, again, as I discussed in the introduction, it's dangerous to do that when, in fact, if you look more closely, you realize, well, not everybody, for example, has the option. If you live in a country where you don't have good municipal water supplies, you might not have a choice. So you can't necessarily vilify something that may not be a real option for people to avoid in some spaces. And also, as I noted, different companies have really different kinds of bottom lines, from the giant multinational conglomerates that are really about profit and taking as much out of the ground as they can, to small companies that are often run by like wonderfully nerdy water, gurus who just love thinking about and tasting different waters and who could actually help educate people. So I think even there with these dichotomies, we need to be cautious about why we're creating them and if they're viable.
Yeah, I definitely want to learn a bit more about some of these smaller companies. Earlier, you cautioned us against the urge to maybe check something off a box. And, stewardship of the environment is truly a lifelong and multi-generational endeavor and responsibility that we have. And in your work, you've gotten the chance to meet and connect with some of these smaller producers. Sometimes you've even referred to them as small water farmers. So I'm wondering if you can maybe give us some examples of how people in this position are well positioned to be good stewards of the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I want to start by saying that any form of bottling water has an environmental impact. I'm not saying that if you drink water from a bottle, any kind of bottle in any context, you are somehow helping the environment. That's not the case. It has an impact. It's a choice that you're making. But there are, a whole series of choices that you can make. Don't drink, bottled water for hydration if you're in an area that has access to good tap water. I always want to have
That's
my
important,
plug to
yes.
make that really, really clear. I drink tap water all the time, and I only occasionally will open a bottle of water that I know, because I'm a water sommelier, right? So I know about different waters, and I can be, I really want to try this with my fish, or, whatever. But these smaller companies, they do a lot of work around stewardship because water is so symbolic, and because there are all kinds of reasons why we need to be cautious around bottled water. I'll give you a couple of examples. I know a company that will only sell its water within a very specific radius of the source, right? In fact, it's integrated into the name of the company. They will not sell beyond that. This notion of a local resource. I know another company that has a whole business model around rewashing its glass, where they will they have distribution to partners who sign a contract promising that they will not throw those bottles away and that they will return them, and then they rewash them with the water from the source. And I think that sends a message of, okay, there are other models out there aside from single-use plastic. The challenges. So you mentioned, I think, both the
Yeah, I know that you've done, also maybe there's the issue of plastic as well. And maybe you can speak to like an example of plastic in context in some of these as well.
Yeah, I mean, so I wanted to say that with these small water farmers, there are the challenges that they're trying to address with solutions in their businesses, and then there are also, there are also things that are hard to understand unless you're in context. So another example there would be in India. I know a company that that was really struggling with what kind of material to use in its packaging, and was worried about using plastic. But in fact, in India, plastic recycling is extremely good, and access to other materials is not. So it's very hard to put water in glass or aluminum in that part of India. Again, India is a place where there isn't great access to fresh water, and where people rely on bottled water. And so they ended up using plastic in in their bottling because it was the right choice to make. So we need to think about local solutions to problems.
Yeah, I think these examples do two things for us, right? They remind us about the power of our own agency. Maybe you are not responsible for managing a local water source, but as a consumer, perhaps. And it also kind of reveals the importance of digging in a little bit deeper than kind of a surface level analysis. Another part of your life, of course, is that you are a professor. And in that context, talking with students about these things, you get the chance to engage with these issues of the environment and sustainability with people who might be approaching these topics for the first time. So in that context, or for anyone listening, the final question is, how would you advise people to go about thinking about sustainability differently?
Yeah, in the classroom, I deal with students who have sometimes no knowledge at all of water, or others that come in with preconceived notions. And both of those are really fun spaces for me to work with them. And what I try to do with all of my students, and again, AUP is a wonderful space to do that because it's this multidisciplinary universe, is to encourage them to beware of greenwashing, beware of oversimplified solutions. Not to reduce your flying or stop eating meat, but to think, okay, beyond just the simple solutions and to really lean into complexity. So I would say that would be sort of what I try to work towards in the classroom and also with my messaging, is that it's okay to live in a muddy space and try to see how local solutions might or might not connect to more global approaches. It's good for us to absorb and pay attention to different perspectives.
Well, Elena, thank you so much.
Thank you.